So you and your friends are going to play some D&D. You have chosen or been chosen to become the Dungeon Master and have decided that you're going to run the starter set Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure. This box is real great at getting new players and new Dungeon Masters into the game, but you might still have questions. So let's go over some of the tips that I have and some of the frequently asked questions that I see for brand new DMs who are looking to run this adventure. If you're looking to be a player in the adventure, this video will contain spoilers, and I advise you don't watch any further. There will be links to each of the timestamps for the chapters that we covered down below, so that if you have a specific question, you can jump straight to it. One of your first questions might be about preparation. How much work do I need to do before we can play this game? You open the box and you see the two books and you're curious, do I need to read these cover to cover, or can we just kind of do it in sections? And the great thing about RPGs is you can do as much or as little prep as you feel is appropriate for the game that you're playing. You don't have to read the books cover to cover if you don't want to. You can open them and play straight out of the box if that's what works for you and your table. I recommend that you do at least a little bit of reading ahead though, and there's a couple of different reasons why. As a dungeon master, you are telling a story, and when you are telling a story, it helps if you know what that story is about. Reading ahead allows you to build a synopsis of what's to come so that you can better describe things and answer questions and mitigate the amount of time you spend looking down into the book. Another good reason for this, though, is due to the way the book itself is laid out. Sometimes you'll need to read to the top of the next page or even flip through pages to make sure you're working with the whole story. A great example of this is the experience points in Chapter 1. The party is ambushed by goblins on the road, but after the fight, they are not immediately awarded experience points. It doesn't tell you how much to give them until they have followed the trail all the way back to the goblin hideout, and then there is a blurb that tells you what to do. Same thing for the hideout itself, because the hideout starts on page 7, but experience points for the hideout are not awarded until page 12. So the party goes through possibly 5 or 6 fights and several hours worth of playing without you knowing what you need to do for experience points. One of the best pieces of advice I have for game prep, though, is to talk to your players. End each game night by discussing with them what they think is happening in the story and where they are planning on heading from here, because it is going to remove so much of the guesswork from your prep time. You can spend less time playing the what if game and more time preparing the stuff that they are heading towards. I cannot tell you the number of times that I assumed I knew what the group was going to do, built all my maps, wrote up all my stat cards, and then as soon as the session started, they headed in completely the opposite direction. So your players have got on the road and reached the point of the goblin ambush. The trap is sprung and a fight breaks out, and it's time for those infamous words, roll for initiative. But what is initiative? Initiative is just D&D's way of deciding what turn order everyone acts in. So each of the players is going to roll a 20-sided die and then look at the top middle of their character sheet to find out what their initiative modifier is. For our fighter, his initiative modifier is a -1, so he takes the result of a 20-sided die roll and then subtracts 1 from it. As the DM, you're going to be looking at the monster stat cards. You'll roll a d20 and then look at the creature's dexterity modifier and add or subtract that from the d20 roll. So our goblins here are a d20 plus 2 from their dexterity. Something to note for the GM is you'll see in the rulebook that all monsters of the same type can go on the same turn. So you can roll a single d20, add the 2 from the goblin sheet, and then have all 4 goblins go on the same turn. It gives you much less to track. However, for that first fight, it is a very deadly fight, especially if the goblins get a surprise round and roll high on initiative. If all 4 goblins are acting on the same turn, that can be 4 back-to-back-to-back-to-back turns that the party is being attacked and they don't have a chance to either heal or reposition themselves in between. Especially if the goblins have surprise and roll high initiative, you could run into an instance where a player can be dead before they even have a turn to go in the game at all. What I do is I normally break my goblins down into 2 groups and do north of the road and south of the road, or my sword goblins and my bow goblins, or just have them all take 4 individual turns. It's more to track, yes, but it can make that fight, which is already pretty unfair, leaning towards the goblins, it can make it much better for the players. Proficiency can be one of the rules that's a little tricky at first, but relatively simple once you figure it out. Proficiency is just a way to determine whether a character is really good at doing something. Anything that your character is trained in doing, you add your proficiency bonus to that thing. If the fighter is making an attack with a big two-handed greatsword, he adds his proficiency bonus to that attack because fighters know how to use big two-handed greatswords. If you took the exact same sword and gave it to the party wizard and he attacked, he would not add his proficiency bonus to that attack because the wizard class is not trained in using big two-handed greatswords. The great thing about the character sheets for the starter set, though, is proficiency bonus has already been factored in to all of the saves, skills, and attacks. If you look at our character sheet, the dark bubbles next to all the saves and skills is which skills and saves that character is proficient in using, and the bonus has already been added. The strength saving throw is a +5 because the fighter has a +3 strength and his proficiency bonus is +2. 2 + 3 is 5. Same thing for his athletics check. Athletics is a skill that relies on strength. Strength is +3. He is trained in using that skill, so he adds his proficiency bonus for a total of 5. The great axe in the center of the character sheet is the same thing. It is a weapon that relies on strength, and we know his strength is +3. He is a fighter and is trained in using a great axe, so he adds his proficiency bonus for a total attack of +5. As the Dungeon Master, when you're looking at the monster stat cards, proficiency has already been factored in and you won't have to do any calculation. If we look at our Goblin's attack, you'll see his scimitar has a +4 to hit, and that's because his scimitar is using his dexterity of +2 and his proficiency of +2. The same thing can be said for the short bow. Dexterity of 2, proficiency of 2, total of 4. Moving into the rules for combat, there are 2 rolls that we're going to make to determine whether we hit something and how much damage we did to it. The first is the attack roll. We roll a 20-sided die and we add our attack bonus to that roll. The attack bonus for our great axe is a +5, 3 from strength, 2 from proficiency, so we roll a d20 and we add that 5. Let's say we get a 12, bringing us to a total of 17. The Dungeon Master then takes that 17 and compares it to the armor class of the monster we are attacking. Goblins have an armor class of 15, and since 17 is greater than or equal to 15, the attack is considered a hit. So our fighter now looks at how much damage that weapon does, and we see it is a d12 + 3. The d12 is because that's how much damage the weapon does by itself. The +3 is from the strength, since strength was used to make the attack with that weapon. So we roll our 12-sided die and add 3, and we tell the Dungeon Master, I do a total of 9 damage. The Dungeon Master then takes that 9 damage and applies it to the goblin because our attack was successful. It is important to note that proficiency never applies to damage, only to the attack roll itself. Furthermore, not all attack rolls rely on strength. Bows and crossbows use dexterity, and certain swords and daggers allow you to pick between the two. The math is always the same. 1d20 plus the ability that the weapon uses, plus proficiency if you are trained in using that weapon. For the DM, you'll look at the monster stat card, and down under actions, each of the attacks the monster has will be listed out. For our goblin scimitar, it is 1d20 plus 4 on our attack roll because he has a +4 to hit. For damage, the hit is 5, and the damage is 1d6 plus 2. 5 is the average of 1d6 plus 2. Spellcasting can be a little different because there are actually 2 different types of rolls to be made. The first is a spell attack roll, and it's basically the same thing as a weapon attack. The person casting the spell rolls a 20-sided die, they add their ability modifier for the spell they're using, for example, wizards use intelligence, and then they add their proficiency bonus because they are proficient in casting those types of spells. So, just like with a weapon, 20-sided die, plus ability, plus proficiency. But the second type of roll is what's called a saving throw. The person casting the spell selects a target for that spell, and then the target must roll the 20-sided die and attempt to make the difficulty class determined by the person casting the spell. For example, a wizard is casting Charm Person on the goblin. The wizard does not need to roll, the goblin must roll, and he rolls a 20-sided die, and he adds his Wisdom saving throw, and then compares that number to the difficulty class of the wizard casting the spell. The spellcaster's difficulty class is determined by their character class, and it's usually 8 plus their proficiency bonus plus their ability for the type of spell they're using. For example, for a wizard at level 1, it would be 8 plus 2 proficiency plus 3 for intelligence, means a difficulty class of 13 to pass their save. What happens on a save or a fail is actually determined by the individual spells. Some spells, if you save against them, absolutely nothing happens, but others, even if you are successful on your roll, there might be secondary effects. The most common of these is those who fail take full damage from the spell, and those who pass only take half damage. The first spellcasting NPC you're going to have to worry about running as the Dungeon Master is probably going to be our friend Glassstaff. He's the leader of the Red Brand Bandits in Phandelver, and the group probably won't encounter him until about the second or third session. His monster stat card is going to be very similar to the ones we've seen before, but note that it does have a special spellcasting section. This section details out his spell attack bonus, his spell saving throw DC, what spells he knows, and what spell slots he has. Keep in mind that lower level spells can be cast in higher level slots, but higher level spells can never be cast in lower level slots. He can cast his magic missile using a second level slot, but he cannot cast Hold Person using one of his first level spell slots. The amount of things you can do on one turn in combat is limited. On each of your turns, you may move up to your speed, take one action, take a bonus action if you have an ability that grants you one, and then between the end of your turn and the start of your next turn, you may take one reaction. The name of each of these is important, and it's important to remember which ones you have taken and which ones you still have available to you. The first item on that list was movement. It's important to note that movement is not an action, and you don't get one movement, you get to move up to your speed. This comes into play because there might be times when you want to move, take an action, move, do something else, and then continue moving. And you can do that as long as you have speed left. For example, a character with a move speed of 30 feet could move 10 feet, make an attack, move 10 more feet, use a bonus action, and then move the final 10 feet before ending their turn. Next on the list is your action, and your action is the main part of your turn. Folks immediately think of the big stuff like attacking with a weapon or casting a spell, but there is more that you can use it for. In the description below, I've included a handout that I typed up for when I was running the starter set because I wanted to show my players what their options were, but also remind them that they only got one action a turn, so if they did one thing on that list, they couldn't do something else. So, hey, just remember, if you attack this turn, you can't use disengage to also run away, or you can't use your action to also drink a potion, so choose your action wisely. Moving along brings us to the bonus action, and this is just something extra you get to do on your turn, but only if you have an ability that grants a bonus action to you. For instance, the fighter has an ability that lets them use a bonus action to regenerate hit points on their turn. So the fighter could use movement to approach a goblin, use their action to attack that goblin with their great axe, use the bonus action to regain some hit points they lost during the ambush, and then end their turn. Bonus actions are important for you as the Dungeon Master because many of the early monsters are going to be goblins, and goblins have a racial ability granting them nimble escape. They can use a bonus action to disengage or hide on each of their turns. This means that a goblin could run up and attack a character with their action to attack with a scimitar, and then use a bonus action to disengage and run away. Or a goblin with a short bow could be in the bushes, stand up and shoot using an action to attack with their short bow, and then use the hide action to attempt to hunker back down in those bushes and make a stealth check so the party can't see where they're attacking from. Finally is the reaction, and reactions are something that you get to do between the end of your turn and the start of your next turn, but you only get one. Reactions can be used in a couple of different ways. There's some spells that are used as reactions, for instance the shield spell that wizards get, and they can use this for when they're being hit with an attack, they can use their reaction to quickly cast that spell and increase their armor class, hopefully negating that attack. Or If an enemy is adjacent to you and attempts to move away out of your threatened range, but they didn't use the disengage action to allow themselves free movement, you can use your reaction to get what's called an attack of opportunity on that character. They drop their guard to attempt to run away, so you get a free swing against them. Advantage and disadvantage are just an easy way to eliminate a lot of the math from earlier editions. Instead of having to factor in multiple different bonuses, you simply look at whether you have advantage or disadvantage. If you have advantage, you roll 2 dice and take the highest number. If you have disadvantage, you roll 2 dice but take the lowest number. For example, if an enemy character was prone and you were attacking them using a melee weapon, you would have advantage because it is easier for you to attack that person because it's harder for them to defend themselves lying prone on the ground. So you would roll 2 dice, take the highest dice, and then add your attack bonus to that number. If you were a character using a bow attempting to shoot the person lying on the ground has made them a much harder target to hit, so you now have disadvantage on that attack. You roll both dice and then take the lowest number and then add your attack bonus to that number. It is important to note that if you have both advantage and disadvantage, it cancels out, no matter how many stacks of each you have. If for some reason you had 3 different things granting you advantage, but anything grants disadvantage, you now just roll as normal. Now that we've covered a lot of the basic rules for getting into the game, let's go over some of the tips for the starter set itself. The first one I have is think about your party size, because the adventure is figuring for about 4 or 5 player characters. If you have more than that or less than that, you're going to need to find ways to adjust the fights so that they're fair, either for the players or for the monsters. You don't want stuff to be too hard, but you also don't want things to be too easy so the players just breeze through it and don't feel like they're being challenged. There are a couple different ways that you can adjust the difficulty of fights on the fly. If the group is having a little bit of trouble with some of the monsters, you can include things like more potions of healing or other supplies in the loot that they find, or consider having monsters start running away at half health, especially the cowardly goblins, because if the group's not fighting them to the death, they're not going to take as much damage. So perhaps once 1 or 2 of the goblins start to fall, if the party's getting beat up, the goblins see that they're taking losses and flee into the woods. If the group is having too easy of a time, you can consider having the goblins run to get more help, or equip some of your enemies with a shield, which is a quick way to increase their armor class by 2, making them harder to hit. The same little goblin is now much tougher to hit, but it's not doing any more damage, and you didn't have to try to include more monsters in the fight. In the description below, I'm going to link to a tool that you can just plug in how many players you have in your game, and it will factor in different ways that you can increase or decrease the difficulty of fights based on the number of players you have. So for each fight, it can tell you adjust the hit points of the monsters to this, or include more monsters or take some away, so that it's fair based on the amount of players that you have. Something else I've seen DMs doing is leveling up their party to level 2 before the book technically allows for it. As we discussed earlier, the experience points for the Goblin Hideout is not granted until after the party has cleared the entire hideout, but this means they're level 1 all the way through the cave and including the big boss fight at the end. You may consider, especially if your group is taking more damage than they should be, allowing them to level up when they take a short rest so that they have new spells, new abilities, and more hit points for the big boss fight at the end or any rooms that they haven't cleared yet. And finally, don't forget to really use your NPCs to the greatest extent possible. Not every encounter need lead straight to combat, not every boss is something that they need to just attack until it's out of hit points, and not every quest giver is giving them quests because it's the right thing to do. The first good example of this is in the Goblin Hideout, because there's a goblin captain named Yimmick who tries to convince the group that they should go kill the bugbear Clarg and retrieve his head. The goblin is attempting to make a power move to take over the clan, and he tries to hold Sildar hostage and use that leverage to get the party to do his dirty work for him. And this can lead to a much more dynamic foe than simply having the goblin be somebody that the group runs in and simply attacks. The next great example of this is once the party reaches town, because they're going to start hearing rumors about these bandits that have really been causing trouble for the last couple of weeks. Several folks give them quests to do something about the bandits, and one woman specifically asked that they get the important documentation from the bandit leader's quarters. The reason that this woman asked this isn't because she wants the bandits cleared out so the town will be safe, but because she sees this as an opportunity for her to gain more power, and she actually wants the leader dealt with and the documentation that he has so that she can contact whoever the bandits are working for and kind of instill herself in this new position of power. So if your group is one that takes this quest, gets the documentation and brings it back to her, you should be thinking behind the scenes, what's she going to do with this? Don't have it simply in there. Figure out whether she makes contact with who they're working for, whether bandits begin following her, what comes of this situation. It makes for a more in-depth and realistic world if the quest doesn't necessarily end just because the party did what they were told. Well, now the NPC has these resources at her disposal. What does she do with them? My favorite set of NPCs in the adventure that I really try to impress on people that they should use them for more than just combat is the two Dopplegangers. There's a pair of shape changers that are working for the Black Spider, and these should be dynamic and fluid living NPCs, not just two things that sit and wait where they're supposed to wait until the party comes upon them and then fights them. There should be times in town where the party gets kind of a bad vibe that something's going on, or gets the feeling that there's stuff happening behind the scenes that they're not quite able to figure out or not quite aware of. They can get the feeling that someone's watching them, or maybe they see an NPC in the inn, but then as they're walking down the street, they pass the same person because the doppelganger has disguised itself as one of the townsfolk and didn't realize that the party just saw that person. There's lots of little neat ways that you can kind of give the party vibes that something's not quite right, or that maybe not everyone in this town is who they say they are or in it for the good of everyone. My last example is the Green Dragon Venomfang. You know, the big bad guy from the front of the box. It's not the final boss of the campaign, but it can definitely be one of the more memorable situations because it's a very tough combat situation, but it's also a very rewarding role-playing situation. It's a great chance to kind of show your party that there are things bigger and badder out there than they are. They're a group of level 2, maybe level 3 adventurers. When everyone's telling them about this dragon, they might not need to just charge in there, no questions asked. It can probably crush them really easily. On top of that, from a social standpoint, this is a very tough thing for the group to overcome. Green dragons are very intelligent, they're cunning and clever, and they're going to try to manipulate the group into doing things that they need done, not for the benefit of the party. So you should really think about how you're going to roleplay this dragon and how you want to set the scene and make it intimidating and terrifying and play it up to be a dragon for the party, not just here's another group of hit points that you need to fight down to 0. In closing, I truly hope that you've taken something from this video and it's been a useful resource. Don't forget to check out down below where I've included all the maps, handouts, blog posts, and the level adjustment tool that we talked about earlier. Additionally, down there is my contact information if you want to reach out to me on Twitter or Reddit or join my Discord server because you have questions about the starter set specifically, D&D in general, or the RPG hobby as a whole. You can reach out at any time and I will help you however I can. So thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to making more of these videos in the future.